Hello my dear friends, welcome back to Top Lesson for you. Friends, we are discussing about the neuromuscular junction. This was my previous lecture which I have recorded about the arrangement of all those things which are needed to explain the neuromuscular junction. Right? Now here in the previous lecture we had discussed that from our spinal cord, the ventral gray horn, from ventral side, ventral gray horn, alpha motor neurons arise, which are myelinated neurons, right, gray matter neurons, and they bring somatic sensations to our skeletal muscles that I have discussed yesterday in the previous lecture, that our skeletal muscles are voluntary muscles. So they get innervation from somatic nervous system. So this nerve, you just consider this nerve is a nerve which arises from somatic nervous system. Now up to here we had discussed, and I hope you have watched the previous lecture, and if you haven't watched that, please go and watch that lecture. I will give the link of that video in the description of this video. You can watch that lecture to have clear concept from the beginning. Now listen carefully. This is our neuromuscular junction. This area is synaptic cleft. This is this membrane which is on muscle, the membrane of the muscle, that is postsynaptic membrane, and the membrane of the nerve, presynaptic membrane, and this is synaptic cleft. Now on the membrane of the muscle there are certain ionic channels, right? These are ligand gated ionic channels, right? These special channels which are called the nicotinic channels, which will bind to acetylcholine, right, which will cause what we will see a little bit a while. So these are nicotinic channels. These are called ligand binded ionic channels, right? Why? Because they have to bind to a special ligand, and then they will cause the entry of ions, right? So they have this is the ligand binding domain of this channel, right? This is a pocket like substance, like area through which these ligands will bind, and these channels will open and will cause the entry of the influx or entry of the sodium to the muscle cell, and will take the resting potential to in-plate potential, and then towards the threshold potential, and then other things, right, which will cause the opening of the voltage gated sodium channels and calcium channels, right, and calcium will enter inside the muscle, and muscles will be depolarized, and that depolarization will cause the contraction of that muscle. Clear, friends? Now look, I had told you in the previous lecture that in this nerve ending or the synaptic bulb there are small vesicles, and these vesicles contain special neurotransmitter. This is neurotransmitter, and this neurotransmitter is called acetylcholine, right? So acetylcholine, our lectures begin now. Acetylcholine is made up of two components. I am using two colors to show you that acetylcholine is a neurotransmitter which is made up of acetyl and choline, right? Now choline is what we take in our food. It is a vitamin-like substance, right? We take it in food. Whatever we eat, that food, right? Some components of our food contains this choline, and all these cholines from our GIT through the blood, right, to the blood flow, goes to nervous system, goes to nerve endings, and they enter inside the nerve endings. Now listen carefully. I will show you that how these enter. Here are special type of uptake mechanisms, or we call them uptaking pumps, right? These are the pumps in the nerve endings, right? And in the nerve endings, when choline comes, right, choline, they enter inside the nerve through these channels, through these pumps, through these uptake mechanisms. So the choline will enter inside. Now let me erase it a little bit to increase the space, right? So when choline enters, and we know that inside this nerve ending there are lots of mitochondria are present there. Lots of mitochondria are there. Now look, when choline comes, right, you know, acetylcholine is made up of two components. So choline is taken in food and acetyl comes from the mitochondria inside the nerve ending, right? Now in this mitochondria, a component is found which is called acetyl-CoA. Acetyl-CoA. Now this acetyl-CoA comes from mitochondria and this choline comes from outside, right? So when both of them come, they unite together and they are bonded with each other. So there will bonded what? There will be the bond between the acetyl and the bond between choline. Acetyl and choline. Who is gone? Who is the person who leaves them? Here is the friend, right? For example, this is a boy, right? And this is a girl. And this is the person who brings this girl to this boy, right? Now this boy will bring the girl to his friend, unite them together, and he will leave them. So who will go? CoA will go. And this CoA will again go towards mitochondria and will help in bringing another girl to his another friend. Right? So now what is formed? Acetyl-CoA is formed. So this acetyl-CoA, for example, you consider that these are the acetyl-CoA that we have made right now. These acetyl-CoA will be pumped inside this vesicle. So acetyl-CoA is pumped inside the vesicle through special uptake mechanism, through special pumps which are present in the membranes of these vesicles, right? And inside the membrane of these vesicles there are also proton pumps. What are their? Proton. Now listen, lots of protons are present inside these vesicles. What happens when these proton concentration are more? So when the proton leaves out, right, who comes in? Acetylcholine comes in, right? Who comes in? Acetylcholine comes inside and is stored in these vesicles. So what did we say? We say that as the formation of acetylcholine occurs in the cell bodies and in the nerve endings, right? Now look carefully, these vesicles, these nerve endings will take up choline, right? And acetyl-CoA will come from the mitochondria, right? So both of them will be combined through an enzyme, and that enzyme will cause the leaving of the CoA, and CoA will go again towards the mitochondria and bring another acetyl, right? So acetylcholine is formed, and this acetylcholine inside this nerve ending will be taken by these vesicles. They will enter these vesicles by the help of ejection or efflux of one proton, right? So proton will leave, acetylcholine enters the vesicle, right? Now who is the person who makes this bond? There is an enzyme which is called choline acetyl transferase, right? This action is performed by, let me make this beautiful person, right? He is the person who is raising his hands, right? And what he has done, he has formed this bond between acetyl and CoA, right? So we say this person is choline acetyl transferase. This enzyme is choline acetyl transferase, right? This enzyme helps in formation of acetylcholine. Good. Now when acetylcholine is formed, right, they are stored in these vesicles, and these vesicles contain lots of acetylcholine which has a very small half-life, about 0.5 seconds, right? Now look what happens when they are from your motor areas, right, from your motor cortex. When a motor impulse comes towards the anterior greyhound, right, when the anterior greyhound receives the motor impulse from the motor cortex of your brain, what happens from there? potential is generated. Right? From here, anterior ventral or ventral gray horn of the spinal cord, what happens, that action potential is generated, and this action potential moves, sweeps on the cell membrane of this nerve and comes up to the nerve ending. So here are voltage gated sodium channels, voltage gated sodium channels, and through these voltage gated sodium channels, when the potential comes, these open and lots of sodium influx occurs. When sodium influx occurs, this potential sweeps on the surface of the membrane of this synaptic bulb and they come up to here. So when they bring the potential up to here, suddenly these calcium channels open. Suddenly these calcium channels open, and when calcium channels open, there is huge influx of what? Influx of calcium. So I'm sorry, inside the nerve ending, what happens? Calcium entry occurs. So lots of calcium is taken in. So when this calcium is taken in, what does this calcium do? This calcium will take the hand of this vesicle and will bring it towards this presynaptic membrane. Now look carefully, friends. In this presynaptic membrane, there are special type of proteins present. Right? This is our presynaptic membrane, and in this presynaptic membrane, in this area, there are special types of proteins present. Proteins are found, right? And the names of these proteins I will write right now. Now look, these proteins, and on the vesicle, right? And on the vesicle, which contains acetylcholine, there are also some proteins are present like this, right? Now what will happen? Calcium will come and will bind these two. Calcium will interact between them, right? And as calcium is positively charged, so this area is negatively charged and this area is also negatively charged, they will cause attraction, right? So let me enlarge that part a little bit. I will enlarge it here. So this is your presynaptic membrane, right? This area, and this is your vesicle, synaptic vesicle. Now here these proteins are present, right? And on the membrane of the vesicle, such proteins are found. For example, my friends, right? Now what happens when the calcium comes in? Calcium will come here and will stay here. Calcium will stay here. Now when calcium stays here, here are negative charges, and calcium is positively charged. So when calcium is positive, this negative will attract calcium, this negative will also attract calcium. So there will be attractive force developed between these proteins and these, and they will cause the contraction, or they will cause the vesicle to move forward towards the membrane. So when the vesicle moves towards membrane, what happens here, that the vesicle fuses with the membrane, and vesicle fuses with membrane is opened up, and when membrane is opened up, acetylcholine is released. What is released? Acetylcholine is released here. Lots of acetylcholine is released. So what are the names of these proteins which are present on the presynaptic membrane endsidely and on the membrane of the vesicle? The name of these are, this one is SNAP 25 protein, right? And this one is syntaxine, right? So syntaxine and SNAP 25 proteins are present on the presynaptic membranes endsidely, right? These one. And these proteins here, they are synaptotagmin, right? And this one is synaptotrypsin. Yeah, this is this is tegmin, synaptobrevin. Right? So these proteins, synaptobrevin, synaptotegmin, are present on the membranes of the vesicle, and syntaxine and SNAP25 are present on the membranes of presynaptic membrane. So they will attract each other. So when they attract each other, they will pull the vesicle towards the membrane, and when the vesicle goes towards membrane, the vesicle is opened and lots of acetylcholine is released. Now look, on the postsynaptic membrane, there are special type of enzymes present, right? There are special types of cutters are there. These are the cutter proteins, right? I will make another one also here. These, right? What will they do? These are called acetylcholine esterases, right? Acetylcholine esterases. What do? They cut the acetylcholine and they don't let them work, right? So when they take the acetylcholine, they will make them denatured. So when acetylcholine is denatured, they can't cause any action, they can't cause any contraction of the muscle. Now listen carefully. When acetylcholine is released from the nerve ending in a huge amount, much amount of them are destroyed by acetylcholine esterases, and very less amount of them will go and bind with the ligand binded protein of the ligand binding ionic channels. They will bind here. So when they bind here, I told you much amount of these acetylcholine are destroyed by these acetylcholine esterases. Why? Because they rapidly act and they rapidly cause the contraction. So when there are lots of acetylcholines present here, there will be lots of contractions on this muscle. You know, we do like this, right? Look, contraction, relaxation, contraction, relaxation. So this is how this acetylcholine is led to work very short time. Acetylcholine is led to work on these channels for very short time. First, their half-life is very less, 0.5 seconds, very less. Then next thing is there are lots of acetylcholine esterases there. These acetylcholine esterases will destroy huge amount of these acetylcholines. Right? So very less amount of the acetylcholine will work for a very short time in the muscle. Right? So this is the binding point of acetylcholine. When acetylcholine binds here on the ligand binded ionic channels, what will happen? They will open their pockets, they will open their gates, and when these gates are opened, right? When these gates are opened, what will happen? Sodium will enter inside the cell. Who is entering? Sodium will enter inside the cell. This is sodium. Right? So these are ionic channels. So through these channels, sodium entered. Now look carefully, friends. I'm not explaining the physiology. I'm just explaining the anatomy of the neuromuscular junction. I'm not explaining the physiology, friends. Now what will happen a little bit? There is resting membrane potential of this cell, right? And then there is the threshold potential of this cell, right? So this is threshold potential and this is resting membrane potential. Now look, if the resting membrane potential of this cell, right, is minus 90 millivolt and threshold potential of it is about minus 60 millivolt. Minus 60 millivolt. Now look carefully. The cell is kept negative. The cell, inside the cell, the potential of the cell, right, is kept negative. right? I will show you. This is negative, right? Okay, why it is negative? But if you know physiology, it is better for you. So it is minus 90 millivolt, right? Because, okay, let me tell you, there are potassium channels, there are sodium channels, right? Now look carefully. When one sodium comes in, for example, when there is entry of, look carefully, there is entry of 2 sodiums inside the cell, right? When 2 sodiums comes, 3 potassium leave, right? When 2 plus charges come, 3 plus charges are leaving. So in the return of 2 plus charges, 3 plus charges are gone out. So there is 1 negative, right? If you have 2 rupees with you and you bought something for 3 rupees, so you have 1 rupees remaining. So this is 1 negative, right? And if for example, if there are 100 sodiums come, 150 potassiums will leave. So there will be 50 plus charges extra leaving. So if 50 extra charges are going out, there is 50 negativity is gained, right? 50 charges negative is gained here. So this is the way how the potential of the cell is remaining plus minus 90 or minus, right? So what happens, look carefully. If the potential of this cell is minus 90 millivolt, when acetylcholine binds here with its receptor, right, sodium will enter through these ionic channels, through these nicotinic channels. When sodium enters, what is happening? Cell is losing negative charges. I'm not saying that negative charges are going out. I'm saying that positive charges are coming in. So if positivity is coming in, negativity will decrease, automatically decrease, right? So what happens? Cell will go towards positive, right? So if cell is going towards positive, cell came up to here. So up to here, acetylcholine action is finished. So when acetylcholine action is finished, there is no contraction in the muscle. Why? Because this potential has not reached up to threshold. So if potential is working in sub-threshold area, there is no contraction in the muscle, right? But if there is more acetylcholine released and there is acetylcholine is binding to the channels for a little bit higher time, what happens? The potential will reach to threshold, and when it touches the threshold, suddenly voltage gated sodium channels will open. It's quite easy. So what are voltage gated sodium channels? Those channels which will open on a specific voltage, which is about minus 60. Right? So when up to here we haven't reached to minus 60. Up to here we also haven't reached to minus 60. But when we go like this and touch this threshold potential, this is the potential at which these gates will open. So we say these gates open on this specific voltage. That's why we call them voltage gated sodium channels. Right? So when these voltage gated sodium channels open, there is huge influx of sodium. Sodium will influx in a huge amount, not like them. Sodium will influx in a very much huge amount. So when sodium comes very much inside the cell, so cell is gaining which charges? Cell is gaining lots of positive charges, and if cell is gaining lots of positive charges, cell is going towards the positivity, my friends. It is running away from negativity towards the positivity. So its potential, for example, its potential will reach to minus 40 up to minus 20, 0, right, plus 10, plus 30, right? So if it touches plus 30 potential, the cell has reached up to plus 30 potential, suddenly calcium channels will open. They are also called voltage gated calcium channels because they open at plus 30 potential. So when these calcium channels are open, then my friends, it is difficult to control the contraction of the cell, right? So what will happen? Huge amount of calcium will enter the cell, right? Calcium is entering, lots of positively charged calcium, double positive charged calcium will enter. So cell will gain lots of calcium. Which cell? The muscle cell. And when these muscle cells gain lots of calcium, you know what happens? These calciums will go and bind with the troponin components of the sarcomere, which I have explained in my previous lectures. My friend, I told you that I'm not explaining the physiology, I'm just explaining the anatomy of the neuromuscular junction, right? So what was there in the previous lecture? Yes, two Z lines, right? And between the Z lines, thick filament were there, right? And in between the two thick filaments there were thin filaments, right? This was the structure of sarcomere, and here was our M line, and on these thin filaments there were myosin filaments present. You know, myosin filaments were there, right? And these myosin filaments, or in these thin filaments, there are certain mechanisms, which is the physiology of the muscle. And when these calciums come and they bind here, calcium bind here, calcium bind here, right? And when calcium bind here, there is attraction between these myosin filaments and these actin filaments, and they will cause, and they will bring the two Z lines near each other, right? So this Z line will move here, this Z line will move here. So when there are millions of Z lines, so all the millions of Z lines will come close to each other. So when these, for example, this Z line became like this, other one, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So these are the 7 Z lines. Now look, these Z lines have taken this area, and these contracted Z lines have taken this area. So the muscles become like this. All the Z lines come close to each other. When come close to each other, so the muscle starts contraction, right? Which you will see in the physiology section. Now my friends, this was about the neuromuscular junction and its activities, right? Again, what will happen to the relaxation of muscle? What will we do with that? It's quite easy. There we have potassium channels, right? When sodium comes, calcium comes, cell is depolarized. Depolarized. And this depolarized means cell is contracted. Contraction, right? What will we do to bring all these Z lines back to their original position? We have to bring the cell back to its resting membrane potential. In which manner? We have to lose these positive charges, right? And if you want to lose these positive charges, what will happen? Suddenly potassium channels will open and there will be lots of exit of potassium. So when potassium is going out, 3 potassiums going out, it means 3 plus charges are going out. So if 3 plus charges are going out, so cell is again gaining its negativity. So cell is again repolarized. This is a repolarization, right? And means relaxation. So the muscle again relaxes, right? So if you see here, this is my bicep muscle, for example, it's my bicep muscle. So it's contracting. It's contracting. It means it is depolarizing. It means it is contracting, right? So if it is relaxing back, it means it is repolarized. It is going in the phase of relaxation, right, friends? I'm not teaching physiology. I'm just teaching anatomy of the neuromuscular junction. So friends, this was enough for the anatomy of the neuromuscular junction. In the next lecture, I will discuss about the types of muscles, which are cardiac muscles, smooth muscles and skeletal muscles, and then we will start discussion on every muscle of the upper limb, the lower limb and the body. So see you guys in the next lecture. Friends, it's a humble request that if you haven't subscribed our channel, please subscribe, do comments, and please share the links of my channel with your friends so that they also get some benefits from our lectures. See you guys in the next lecture. Till then, Allah Hafiz.